unlikely that had you raised your hand just now, God would have arranged the past furniture of the universe slightly differently than he in fact did? Is there some reason to think it unlikely that your having raised your hand just now and the ensuing train of events that event would have caused would have constituted good reason for God to have arranged the past distribution of matter and energy slightly differently than he in fact did? Perhaps we have some such reason, but I have a hard time seeing what it would be. I should think we're poorly placed to know much about what the total causal consequences of your raising your hand just now would have been, and whether, had those things occurred, God would have done something different in the past. Perhaps if you'd raised your hand just now, it would have had among its causal consequences that Cuthbert prayed fervently to be spared some difficulty. And perhaps God, knowing Cuthbert would pray thus, would have arranged the past distribution of matter and energy slightly differently so as to prevent Cuthbert's trouble. Do we have some reason for thinking such things unlikely? I can't see what they'd be. The probabilities here, I should think, are inscrutable, beyond our ken. But if so, then Al's thought about A and 8, that if that's what accidental necessity amounts to, there will be too few contingent propositions about the past such that we've reason to think them accidentally necessary, strikes me as right. For if we're in the dark about the likelihood that had you raised your hand just now, God would have arranged the past distribution of matter and energy slightly differently than he in fact did, then presumably we're similarly situated vis-a-vis lots and lots of other actions. For all we know, for each of lots and lots of our actions, had they gone differently, God would have arranged the past distribution of matter and energy slightly differently. Given accidental necessity a la A and 8, then, it follows that for all we know, all sorts of facts about the past distribution of matter and energy are not fixed, not accidentally necessary, still within our control. Since, arguably, that doesn't square well with, quote, our deep intuitive beliefs about the asymmetry of past and future, the fact that the future is within our control in a way in which the past is not, Al was right, I think, to worry about the adequacy of A and 8 as an explication of those deep intuitions. Section 4, let me close with a related point and then a question for Tom. We Molinists are libertarians about freedom. We think we're free and that freedom is incompatible with causal determinism. Many of us are persuaded of the last bit, that freedom is incompatible with determinism, on grounds of the consequence argument. Tom suggests in his magisterial Divine Providence, the Molinist account, that that argument is cogent indeed, and though short of a proof of incompatibilism, it constitutes strong grounds for the latter. The argument has been subject to intense scrutiny over the last, maybe not quite 30 years, but getting up on 30 years. Early formulations in terms of Peter's rule beta, NP, NP only if Q, from those things infer NQ, have been shown problematic. The rule thus formulated is subject to counterexample. Happily for the libertarian, there are ways of defining the N operator and variations on rule beta that are impervious to counterexample and provably valid in the usual counterfactual logics. For example, let N be defined like this. NP means by definition P is true, and no matter what anyone does among the things he or she is able to do, were she to do that, it would still be that P is true. Then we get this rule beta star from NP and NQ, and necessarily if P and Q then R, infer NR, which is provably valid in the usual counterfactual logics and can be deployed in a consequence-style argument for incompatibilism as follows. Letting P naught describe the total state of the world at some moment of time in the distant past, L, the laws of nature, and Q, some future contingent proposition about creaturely free action. We have 1, NP naught, premise 2, and L, 3, box P naught and L, only if Q, It's a consequence of determinism, and then 4, therefore, NQ by rule beta star. The conclusion generalizes to the actions of all creatures, and we've the usual reasons here for incompatibilism. But given the considerations I raised in the previous section, there's this worry with the argument so formulated. Given Molinism, it's possible that there are creatures with counterfactual power over facts about the past distribution of matter and energy. I argued in the previous section that for all we know, we are such creatures. If I'm right, it follows by straightforward argument that for all we know, one is false. For all we know, there are lots of actions such that were we to perform them, it might have been that P0 was false. The upshot I propose is that if you're a Molinist, then for all you know, one is false. If you're a Molinist, you've reason for agnosticism about premise 1 of the above version of the consequence argument. That's a problem for Molinists, since the above argument, so I think anyway, is among the strongest formulations of the consequence argument for incompatibilism. So worry then, Molinists can't help themselves to one of the strongest arguments for incompatibilism. And then a question in closing for Tom. Are there versions of the consequence argument built atop provably valid beta-like inference rules that don't suffer from this problem? Thank you.
All right, those of you with questions, as usual, approach one of these 2 mics, and again, we'd like to give some precedence.
Laura,
Yeah.
I have a brief reply.
Oh, sorry, sorry. All right, so first, we'll approach this mic, and Tom will give a short response.
I want to thank Tom for his comments. They really are terrific, and if I want to take no more than 5 minutes, I can't say very much about them. So I think I won't say much at all about his first point, okay? I must admit I was sort of relieved when I saw that his first point had to deal with a minor issue that I had in a footnote. I'm not sure whether he's right about that counterexample or not. My inclination is to think that there are ways to revise it. I should say that in giving the counterexample, I was assuming that killing is a one-and-done affair, that you can't be killed more than once. I think there are probably ways to revise the counterexample, but I'm not sure, and not a whole lot hangs on it, so I don't want to take any more time talking about that. The second and third points, though, I think are a little bit more significant. The second point, remember, that Tom raised concerns AN8. I said AN8 isn't as implausible as Al suggests because he's right, that is, Al is right, in saying that it's monumentally unlikely that I have counterfactual power over the Peloponnesian War and things of that sort. Tom thinks that Al is right about AN8 because, as a Molinist, Al is wrong to make the monumentally unlikely claim. Okay? Each of us is saying that Al is right about something and wrong about something. If you notice the way we presented it, we sort of very forthrightly emphasized what Al is right about and sort of de-emphasized what it is that we think he's wrong about. Okay? Well, I'm inclined to go in Al's direction here. Al, I think, is wrong about AN8 because he's right to make the monumentally unlikely claim. Now, defending that inclination might not be all that easy, and I'm not quite sure what's the best way to do it. But here would be one approach, at least. Simply appeal to common sense, to our natural inclinations. All of us, Molinists included, are strongly inclined to think that there is some general asymmetry between past and future. That's the common sense default assumption for all of us regarding facts about the past, that we don't have control over them in the way that we typically do with many, at least, truths about the future. Now, Molinists admit that we can have counterfactual power over, to use Tom's phrase, the past distribution of matter and energy. But I think most Molinists see no reason to think of such cases where we really do have that kind of power, as anything other than exceptions to the general rule that we lack that kind of power.